Now we welcome in to the Minor Lounge, Kendall Kaut, our Daily Bears editor-in-chief. Kendall, how are you doing? Happy New Year to you, sir.
Heck yeah, I'm doing well, Andrew. Happy New Year to you as well. I really do like the Hamilton picture in the background. It beats having a exercise bike looking like a scrub by me. So like the chair, like the background.
Thank you very much. No, you should really do this interview on the exercise bike. I think just get a workout in, talk some Baylor hoops, talk whatever else we're going to talk about in the lounge. I think that would be entertaining for all.
That's fair. I can't pull it off, but I respect it.
Fair enough. So, Kendall, I know that you went to up to Ames this past weekend to cover the Baylor Iowa State game. We'll get into that in a second. Just real quick, I know for those that haven't read Kendall's work on our Daily Bears for SB Nation, really great stuff, great pieces. He has feature interviews on a majority of the Baylor players, such as Jared Butler. Really a whiz with the rhetoric. It really jumps off the page, and you've been a lawyer for 5 years now. How does that translate as you're writing, practicing in the courtroom to kind of transitioning to be moonlighting as a Baylor hoops analyst?
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the kind words, and that's a real good question. The thing I like to think is that they both kind of interplay with each other. So kind of the legal skills you hope are that you can make kind of a compelling argument and see sort of every side of the argument. So I like to think that if I'm writing a piece about, hey, should Baylor do something differently offensively or should they play a different lineup, that hopefully I can see more perspectives about that. Kind of the limitation for me is I like to think I know a little bit about basketball, but I'm also writing about a subject where the people who ultimately make the decisions know infinitely more about basketball than I do. Or at least in the legal world, by the time I'm writing a brief or a memo, or advocating that some guy needs to go to prison or some guy doesn't need to go to prison, I at least think that I'm at a high enough level on the law that there aren't too many people on that narrow issue that will know more than me. And that's what I hope to get whenever I write about something basketball-wise, but I do understand that there is still a limitation with my knowledge, certainly compared to the people that ultimately make those decisions. And I hope that I can at least convey that uncertainty when I kind of make those kind of decisions with what I advocate for.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really good. A lot of great comparisons. You had a phenomenal Substack newsletter covering the 2020 presidential election, which was really good. Over 5,500 words. I think that last one was, predicting the outcome. Kind of like Hamilton, writing nonstop. So, good for you. Really great arguments. Every time I read something, I'm like, yeah, that's accurate. No flaws, no notes. But on the other hand, Baylor hoops did have some notes probably to take away from their matchup in Ames. First off, yeah, you braved the snow, you braved the elements to drive up there. What was that experience like? Kind of waking up, you documented on Twitter, but what was that like for you? Quickly into the new year, and you're driving up to Ames, Iowa.
Sure, yeah, it was early morning. I got up at about 5:30, made the trek to Ames. It's about 3.5, 4 hours. Some of the snow plowing is not quite as good in Missouri, so that was a little challenging, but I didn't die, so that's always a good thing when you're going to a Big 12 game to say, I didn't, I made it. So happy about that. Was happy to have gone to the game. It's different in kind of this environment. Andrew, I know you've gone to some football games, so you could probably speak to how is a football game different with reduced capacity. But basketball, the interesting thing is that at the K-State game I went to, you could really hear some of the players discussing things more than you could in the past. At the Iowa State game, I could hear a little bit more that was said. I still have absolutely no idea how Jared Butler got that technical foul because I could just hear John Higgins say something about back, and I don't know what the heck he was saying about that. So I still have no idea. Watching the clips, it's like trying to be a conspiracy theorist about the Kennedy assassination, where I break down a split second. I'm like, I don't know. I really do not understand what happened or what was said or what went down in the arena, out of the arena. I got no clue.
Yeah, no. The technical foul that he picked up, and I'm pretty sure he said that he didn't say anything as well. And when I asked him about it in the press,
that's a great question because I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, so that was wild, and that really right there kind of sparked a that second half run that Iowa State used to kind of keep the game close. First, I guess what was just your takeaways from that game against Iowa State? We kind of thought going into it, Iowa State wasn't a very good basketball team. I think they lost to Kansas State, but they played West Virginia really close. They're kind of at the bottom of the pack of the Big 12. What were your thoughts being there? It was I like to say 10% capacity in the COVID pandemic, but it was still close to 100% Hilton Magic.
Yeah, so I think that it's one of those games where you can either have a very negative takeaway to say Baylor shouldn't have played Iowa State that close, that's not good, or a positive takeaway. I don't know that I'm somebody who's naturally optimistic about everything, but I had positive takeaways because for me it was really easy to contrast that game with the TCU game last season. What I thought was very similar is that Baylor didn't shoot well from three, and they didn't do that last year in Fort Worth either. And Iowa State made a little bit of a run, shot a little out of their mind, kind of like TCU did last season. But you look at kind of the KenPom ratings of both TCU last year and Iowa State this year, they're very comparable. And Baylor found a way to win the game on Saturday when they didn't play their best basketball. They didn't by any stretch. And they didn't win that game last year in Fort Worth when they didn't play their best basketball. So I think that's a positive. And I don't think the signs that Baylor had for weaknesses are that devastating to the Bears. Every team has a weakness in basketball. This isn't the 2015 Kentucky Wildcats, a team that still didn't win the national title, where you're rolling out 7 NBA players that are ready to go to the league immediately. They have some flaws. Any team in basketball has flaws. Gonzaga, I think, has flaws defensively. Baylor's flawed, you might take away from this game, I think, are the two on the defensive end about is their pick and roll coverage good enough? And then what do they do with a mobile big man who can isolate like Solomon Young, was able to do in that game? I think that's going to be a question for them going forward about how would they play a guy like Drew Timme, who's a much better big man than Solomon Young is. So that may be a little bit of an issue for the Bears. And how does their pick and roll coverage work later on? I know you had asked some questions about that. Tim Watkins from Bears Illustrated did as well, where Baylor switched screens. So those are maybe the two questions you have about how would the Bears do. Not a lot of teams, though, that have big men that can just isolate. I think the Bears have some counters to that kind of thing. But, Andrew, when you look at that game, are you more optimistic about Baylor winning a game where they didn't have their A game, or are you more pessimistic that you got to dominate teams like Iowa State a little more than the Bears did?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic. Really first true Big 12 game coming out of the Christmas and New Year's break. Adam Flagler was still recovering from being in COVID protocol and kind of ramping up that athleticism that Coach Drew mentioned in the presser as well. So kind of with that in mind, I think it was just one of those games where it's like, okay, we have to ramp up and we're figuring out how to play, better competition, even though Iowa State's still at the bottom of the Big 12. Like, all right, this is what it's going to be like night in, night out type thing. And then, of course, they didn't shoot their best, which was a little concerning. I did think that they played a little bit of too much isolation ball, shooting early in the shot clock, not passing enough, right? And like you, I think I'm okay with isolation ball, especially if the shots go in, right? It's a different story completely, right? You're like, oh, yeah, that's NBA talent or whatever the case may be. But I'd like to see a few more passes before, we put a shot up, just rotate it around, kind of like we were seeing in the non-conference play. But I lean a little bit more optimistically. Fran Fraschilla said, 5 games a year, you're probably going to play really poor basketball, and it's what you do on those nights that make teams elite. That being said, I really am a little anxious to see how they respond Wednesday against Oklahoma and then Saturday at TCU and then beyond as they face stiffer competition. I'll turn it around. What about you? I would get the sense that you're a little bit more optimistic, but, what do you think that they have to do, that Baylor has to do against, Oklahoma in their next few games here to kind of respond and kind of prove that, that was an anomaly?
Sure. Oklahoma's a little bit of a scary team because they're one of the most variable teams in the conference. They had the Big 12 Player of the Week last week, who's a guy who transferred from UNT, and he went 8 of 11 from 3 against West Virginia. Austin Reeves went to Wichita State. Wasn't that good in his first season at Oklahoma, but is also another player who could really score efficiently. Brady Manick played all the way back when Trae Young was still at Oklahoma. That's how long this dude's been around. He also can fill up the stat sheet. So my concern with Baylor in this contest is their defense over-rotate a little bit too much? And does that lead to some open threes for Oklahoma? Iowa State, and Steve Prohm's a really good coach, was able to run a few screen actions, and Baylor had to get so concerned with the big men that they would have to rotate 1 or 2, I think, passes a little bit more than they wanted to, and Baylor works quickly. Their defense is top 10 nationally. So maybe that's a little bit of a concern that Oklahoma gets some open threes, and they have the shooters that are capable of doing that. So I think the onus is more on that defensive challenge. But I think what you brought up is very true, Andrew, that when you look for how is a way that Baylor can elevate their play from the Iowa State game, I don't think Adam Flagler is going to play as poorly as he did against Iowa State. He did have some nice defensive moments, but I don't think he's as poor of a shooter as he was against Iowa State. And when he's battling COVID, as Scott Drew mentioned in the post-game press conference in response to a question by Jason King, I think he'll play better eventually. And once he gets playing better, you have Jared Butler, you have Maceo Teague, top 2 guys on Bart Torvik's website right now, the Big 12 Player of the Year. You feel pretty good when Davion Mitchell is also number 2 on Evan Maya, and I think might be playing the second best basketball for Baylor. And I think the argument he's played the second or third best basketball in the Big 12 as well. I just think that Baylor is probably about a 90% favorite in that game. So 10% underdogs win all the time. Baylor, Oklahoma in football last season. We know that 93% favorites, which is what Baylor was when they had that 28-3 lead. Sorry for mentioning that. Those happen, but I think Baylor's a pretty solid favorite. But when you look at that game, Andrew, what are kind of your keys or what are you focused on for that contest?
Yeah, I think it's got to be defensively. I think last year some of my takeaways were, the vulnerability of Baylor just seemed to be that, they weren't, again, defensively, they weren't there. They were getting dominated by Azubuike. They were letting teams shoot threes. And on offense, they were struggling with, mid-range jumpers. They were missing a lot of shots. They were missing a lot of foul shots that let these, lesser teams, just call them, hang around. And that's why we saw so many, close games at the end all last season. Now, Baylor is a dominant team, and they found ways to win nearly every night, but it ultimately caught up to them at the end of the year with injuries and poor free throw shooting, poor defense, etc. And that's what I really liked about Iowa State was that they were able to, in the first half, they weren't shooting, weren't hitting from 3, but they were finding ways to, with pick and rolls and screens and create creative backdoor cuts, finding ways to finish at the rim and convert all of those, which I thought was really optimistic in the first half. And then they came out, hit 2 threes. Jared Butler got the 2-handed dunk. Flo Thamba got the 3-point play. All of a sudden, it's an 11-5 run, I think it was, to open the half. You're up 10, you're back up double digits, and it's looking good. And then, of course, Jared Butler got that technical, which we'll just call it a mystery T for now. We don't really know what happened. You were there. You couldn't hear anything in a basically vacant gym. The keys against Oklahoma, I think, is interior defense, and then just making sure that on that over rotation point that they don't get too far out of rotation to where they're just giving up open jumpers. I thought late in the game against Iowa State, they were giving up a lot of open jumpers, and it didn't seem to me to be off pick and roll play. It just seemed to be that, they were getting caught up, and Iowa State did a good job of finding the open man for baseline jumpers, for a 3-point shot here and there. And then, Solomon Young was definitely a force inside, which was a little bit concerning for me. But, I think that's what they have to do. I think they just have to guard, play true, man-to-man defense and guard well, communicate well on defense, and be really physical and limit the Sooners to one shot. That's, to me, that would be a great response for the Bears. So that's kind of the way I see it. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Austin Reeves had to look at a 3 to win the game last year in Waco, if I remember correctly, right?
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah. So, I think Oklahoma's a better team than, definitely better team than Iowa State, Kansas State. So I think it will be a ramp, a next level up for sure. So, that's kind of, the big thing for me. But what do you see, like, when you're looking at the defense? I kind of want to just ask a little bit more, how was Iowa State able to get, from your perspective, those open looks? It seems like they kind of had their way, for lack of a better word of describing that.
Sure. So Baylor still had a really good defensive efficiency day overall. Mm-hmm. But I do think, point, Andrew, that probably a few more open shots late than the Bears might have wanted to give up. I think, and again, you can critique what I'm saying and say that it's too optimistic of a take. I think that when Davion Mitchell and Mark Vital got 4 fouls, it kind of put Baylor in a tough spot for how they wanted to defend teams. And so I am interested in asking Scott Drew about this tomorrow in the press conference we'll both be at, Andrew. Mm-hmm. When they get 4 fouls on Mark and Davion, is there a difference in kind of how they want to approach taking charges versus blocks? I thought that one of the fouls they didn't call Davion's way in the second half, I thought was more of a charge than some of the ones they called in the first half were. And so I think that their inability to get those charge calls they wanted might have caused them to let up a little bit defensively. And then Mark Vital is just so important because he can switch 1 through 5 if he's playing the 5, guard anybody on the court. And he also really helps out Flo and John when he's in the back line, because if they kind of screw up their assignment a little bit or get beat off the dribble, he can just, kind of march right in and defend people. So my concern is really that foul trouble put Baylor in a very difficult spot. And so how they handle that going forward, I think becomes more of an issue. And I think they were just a little bit surprised at some level maybe about how they were holding up at times. And then I think being in a tighter game affected them a little bit. So I think it is more the circumstances Baylor found themselves in explains some of their issues defensively more than Baylor has recurring foundational defensive issues.
That's really interesting. I didn't consider that. The foul trouble definitely could have been a factor there for, like, you know, maybe laying off or, you know, not switching as aggressively or something like that. To me, I think the interior play is, you know, they were kind of getting bullied a little bit to me. So I'd like to see, you know, improvement there on that block. Do you see that as just miscommunication? You know, you talk about misassignments, or do you think that's just maybe we're too small inside?
I am a little bit worried that Baylor will struggle at times with big men that can score inside. I think Baylor is probably just going to have to double the post a lot and then count on their guys being very quick to close out and not close out too hard and still defend. That Gonzaga matchup will really come down to, I think that Baylor probably has to give something up if that game ever gets played. And just Gonzaga can't hit threes from guys that aren't Jalen Suggs and Corey Kispert, because Drew Timme really will be a menace in that kind of contest. But at the same time, Baylor didn't get overwhelmed by Illinois' offense and were able to deal with Kofi Coburn, who's a great big, but a shooting big who can kind of stretch out like their other dude, their European guy, I can't remember his name right now. What he was able to do, if you have a big man like that, and Drew Timme can do that from Gonzaga, that becomes more of a question mark. So there aren't a lot of teams that can say, we have guards like this, and we also have a big man who can play like that. And that's why Gonzaga might be one of the best teams in the last decade. And if that game happens and you're Baylor, you just got to go in hoping you can hit some triples. And if not, you're probably going to lose. If you're Gonzaga and you can't hit threes, you're probably going to lose. But at some level, that's a lot of what basketball has become in 2020, where if your three-point shooting is way off, you don't win. And again, that's kind of why I'm optimistic about Saturday, because I don't know that Baylor is going to shoot that poorly again this season. KU goes 3 of 23 from Saturday. They get absolutely blitzed by Texas. They goes 4 of 19. They win handily on the road.
Yeah, and it was interesting because you were on a podcast episode with Ashley Hodge of Cyclones 365, and you know you talked about that you know basketball is basically about making threes, and basically you wished in the Kansas game last year that we had, you know, just really focused on Azubuike and just let Kansas shoot threes, and you know if they go in, like, so be it. They could have a 3 for 23 game like they did against Texas, or they could hit you know 9, 10, 12 shots, whatever it is. So I think that's a very interesting point. And I think it's Georgie is his name for Illinois, the backup center there. Okay. Yeah, they had.
Yeah, sounds right. Yeah, again.
Yeah. So they had a good showing. There. Interesting point. I think Ayo Dosunmu for Illinois only scored 18 points against Baylor. They held him to 18 points, and I think he's had over 20 in 7 other games this season. So that makes me optimistic as well, thinking that the Iowa State performance is not is that anomaly, and something like against Illinois where maybe we struggled for a half or something, but then came out and were able to make shots and play better defensively, is something that Baylor fans have to look forward to and be optimistic about. But until the games are played, it's all speculation. And there's some hot takes in there. I was curious, kind of from your perspective, what's your hottest Baylor basketball take on this team? It could be in general, or it could be on this team. I'll take either.
That's an excellent question. I guess my hottest take. Ooh, man, that's a phenomenal question, because I normally am a hot take guy. In fact, I'll even meet people and be like, what's your just hottest take about life? Because that kind of tells me a lot about a person, like what's their perspective, how do they approach things. And if they throw out something totally wild, like 9/11 is an inside job, you immediately know, all right, let's get out of here. You don't want to deal with this person. And that tells you more than anything else. You don't have to waste hours interacting with somebody that will eventually reveal their craziness to you. I guess, Andrew, do you have one that you could say first? Then I will think of a couple and give those. And I don't want to duck this question at all, but sure. If you have one now, let me know. Then I'm going to give a couple.
Sure. On this team, I guess my hottest take, and I try to be very pragmatic and neutral, if you will. But I guess my hottest take would be that this Baylor basketball team can be the greatest basketball team of all time. Better than 76 Indiana, better than the Kentuckys of 2012 and 2015, better than 09 Carolina, better than the 91-92 Duke teams and so on and so forth. So they obviously have a lot of work to do, and it seems like a silly take coming off the Iowa State performance, but I think they have a real opportunity to, even if they maybe drop one conference game or two conference games, if they run the table and they beat Gonzaga and they beat Texas a couple times and only lose to Kansas once or something like that, then I think they have an argument for greatest team of all time.
So I think that in terms of it's sort of the greatest versus best debate, you get in with like LeBron versus Jordan versus Kareem. I think if Baylor went undefeated, or only lost one game and won the title and beat Gonzaga to win the title, they would have a good argument that they have the greatest resume of all time, though their non-conference game getting so many canceled. I think that would be an attack on that stretch. For me, 2015 Kentucky and the last millennia will be the best team of all time just because of how dominant that team was until they lost in the Final Four. So I would disagree with that take, but it also makes me respect it because it is a hot take. At least
it's meant to be disagreed with. Yeah, that's the purpose of hot take. But yeah, I appreciate it.
Sure. I think there is always a debate about this, about who's the best player versus the most important player on a team. Baylor's best player, I think, is pretty clearly Jared Butler. I would say their second best player is Davion Mitchell, and I think their third best player is Macy O'Teague. But my hot take would be that I think their most important player is probably Mark Vidal, because I think that if he is gone, what you would have to replace would be so kind of catastrophic to figure out what you have to do. I think Matt Meyer's very good. I think John Mochachu is very good. I think Flo is a good player as well. But I think if you didn't have Vidal, how you'd have to match up with team after team in the tournament would become a real disaster for the Bears, because if you get a team where maybe you're not making threes, how's your frontline defense going to hold up getting into a rock fight with somebody else? Or if you want to switch everybody, how do you handle that? So that would be my biggest concern, is that if I think Mark Vidal might be the most important player on the team, although certainly Jared Butler is the best player on the team. And if Jared Butler went away, I'm not feeling as good about the Bears. I think Mark Vidal might be the most important player on the team. And probably my second hot take, I've gone back and forth with what do I think Baylor's closing lineup will be at the end of the season. I think closing time at the end of the regular season, or if it's the Gonzaga game, or if it's a Final Four game and Baylor's down 6 points and has to make a comeback with 6 minutes left, I think their closing lineup and their biggest moments of the season will be the four guards of Butler, Mitchell, Teague, Flagler, and Vidal. I think that's going to be their best lineup by the end of the campaign. That's, I think, what they're going to roll with in their biggest moments of the season.
Yeah, no, those are two great takes. I think I would agree with that Vidal one. I think I said that a lot last year. If not most important, definitely the funnest player on the court for just taking charges and diving and things like that, getting dirty, so to speak. And the 5-0 in closing time, against Gonzaga in the national championship, that's certainly something that, of course, if we get to that point, we would love to have that opportunity, right? Baylor fans would love to have that opportunity. So that's interesting. I would, to me, if I'm going back to my hot take, like they are going to be the greatest team of all time. Well, of course they have to basically run the table essentially, right, to be in that conversation. But I think about what elements have to improve on the team in order for them to be able to do that, right? Because I don't think they're quite there yet. I think we saw that against Iowa State. I don't think all the pieces are in there. You mentioned foul trouble, so we see different elements come into play. What does Baylor have to do to improve on? Maybe not to be the greatest team of all time, but to win that national championship, to make that Final Four run. Is there anything in their game that you see and say, if they could just do this, I would be much more confident in their ability to go to Indianapolis or go to the Final Four in Indianapolis?
I think that the audio is getting a little off for you right now by chance.
It's technology for you. Are you having a hard time hearing me?
It was just my audio was echoing for a second. Now it does not appear to be doing that. So I think the questions you would have for the Bears are about how is their play at this level sustainable. So if you saw, say, 10 more games of Davion Mitchell shooting better from three, I think he is a much better three-point shooter than he was his first 2 years. Maybe that's a concern. So I think it's just sustainability on the offensive end. Are they really the three-point shooting team they were for their first 8 games? Or are they the three-point shooting team they were in Ames? No, they're not the three-point shooting team they were in Ames, but are they closer to that than they were against some of their other opponents? I think the sustainability of three-point shooting is probably the thing I would look at the most. And then Can Baylor hold their turnovers down? Their turnover margin has been much better than it has been in so many years in the past. Can they limit that turnover margin? I think they can. Certainly okay if you want to address that. I mean, I'm coming on your show, Andrew, so certainly okay if you want to address that. But one kind of hot takey question I would have for you is, say it was a deal or no deal kind of situation, and the banker calls you up and says, Baylor wins the Big 12, and they make the Final Four, but they lose in the Final Four, so they don't get a chance to win the national title. Would you take that deal knowing Baylor wins their first Big 12 title and they get to go to the Final Four, or would you say no deal, you want to roll the dice on Baylor's chance to win a national championship?
Yeah, I'm a very conservative person by nature, so I'm probably in like 70 or 85 at least percent inclined to take that deal. And I probably would, just knowing that, the Baylor recruiting seems to be on the up and up. You're still going to have returners from this team potentially come back, and 6 games in March is a crapshoot. Every year you mentioned in a previous, back to that podcast with Ashley, Connecticut won in 2011 and 2014. So, crazier things can happen in that. So I think I would take this, but I just think that's part of my personality by nature. I don't know. Would you take that deal?
No. And I think it is a personality difference because obviously if Baylor wins the Big 12, makes the Final Four, you cannot rule this season anything but an absolute success and say it is a huge achievement. But for me, I think kind of what you mentioned, I don't think this will be the greatest team of all time, just because I think Kentucky 2015 to me is kind of unbreakable in that mold. I think they can win the national title. I think it's clear that Gonzaga or Baylor are the 2 best teams. I think they're the best teams by quite a lot. But for me, it comes down to, I don't know that Baylor will ever get a better chance to win a national title than this. If you get a guy as good as Jared Butler was a sophomore, the odds that guy comes back maybe aren't quite as high. Davion Mitchell didn't even go through the process. Somebody who fits the mold of Mark Vidal might just decide he doesn't want to stay in school for a 5th season. Maceo Teague might decide, I don't want to be here for a 5th year as well. So I think it's just Baylor is a little bit lucky in how the pieces have all come together in this way this season. That Scott Drew is at a program like Baylor, right? We both went to Baylor. We both graduated from Baylor. But I think being honest, we can say that Drew is better than the job naturally is. Jerome Tang is the lead assistant. I think it's lucky that Baylor has a lead assistant that good. They've got a guy recruited internationally like John Jacobs, the guy who handles the defense so well, and Al Brooks. I think a lot of their support staff is also at a very high quality. I think that you'll look back on kind of how the circumstances came together right now and say they got real lucky. KU is kind of the poster child, though, for your case, Andrew, of showing that you can be really, really good and still have heartbreaks in that first weekend of the tournament, or lose to VCU in the Elite Eight, or lose to Oregon when you play.
Bradley.
Yeah, I mean, KU is just a poster child for
Iowa. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah, every year, and still get brutally defeated before they make the Final Four. But for me, I don't know if they'll ever have a better chance than this. And they might have teams that are ranked 1 seeds multiple times going forward. But for me, I don't know that it ever is a better team than this. And that's kind of why I'm trying to get to as many games as possible and figure out my life around that, because I'm just kind of like, I don't know that it gets better than this. And if it does, fantastic. But if it doesn't, I want to live up as much as I can right now.
Yeah, that's terrific. I'm so glad that you're doing that. And I did leave that 15% chance because that's a really good point. The pieces just all fell into place. Like easily people could have left, to the NBA, to overseas. You seem to have a phenomenal bench. The really only thing you're missing is just like a dominant, 6'11", 7 foot, really thick, muscular center or, rim protector or something like that. And even then, Flo Thamba seems to, be coming into his own each and every night. And I wouldn't trade Jonathan Chachua's energy for the world. I think he's a really, really important player off the bench. So yeah, I agree with you. That's definitely interesting. I would modify it. If you could give me two Big 12 guaranteed 2 Big 12 championships, I think it makes it that much more difficult. But it is what it is. So it's definitely something to watch, and hopefully they can do it all like we've been prognosticating on here. So
right. And I think for me, Andrew, I'm sure it's going to be the same way for you. The one thing I'm kind of dreading this year is if we do have to have the final press conference of the season and it's a loss for Baylor, and kind of knowing that I would assume if it's the final loss that they'll probably bring out 4 guys, and I would assume they'll bring out Teague, Butler, Mitchell, and Vital. And my guess is that I don't think any of those guys will be back next season. They could, but I think that they'll all be gone. And it's going to be sad to kind of see them crying up there, seeing them sad, knowing they got that close. So that's kind of why I'm just like, I'm not taking any deal that ends it for them. But I think rationally, if you are like getting out the actuarial tables on expected value, it's the right call to take it. But I can't handle it. I really don't want to be in that press conference with everybody crying at the end of the year. I can't do it. I'm going to do it if it happens, but I'm like, man, I don't want to be in that one.
No, yeah, we're going to be on the court in Indianapolis, and we're going to have the confetti fall down. We're going to be champions, and we wouldn't have lost up to that point. So it would be a perfect season and the best team in college basketball, and it's the greatest story of all time for sure. You know, I'm looking at some notes here. Baylor's still averaging about 93 points a game, averaging about 40 boards a game, 20 assists, 10 steals, 12 turnovers. So I think they want that turnover number down a little bit more, down to around 7 per game is their goal. I'm just really, you know, we talked the sextuplet of guards that Baylor has is just phenomenal, and I include Matthew Meyer and LJ Cryer in that guard, lumping, if you will. So not really a question there. Just wanted to throw out some stats. It's my show. I guess I can do that. We're casual here. So, we talked a little bit about OU, talked about TCU. Meanwhile, I think that TCU game, you're going to be in for a treat because the players have mentioned over and over how important it was to beat Washington and to beat what was the other team that they wanted revenge on, or I'm losing here.
I don't know who else they would have necessarily. I mean, West Virginia and KU beat them, so those would be other teams. You guys stick out given what had happened.
Yeah, they were. I just know that every time we asked them about the Washington game, they were really. Stephen F. Austin. A couple of the players said.
Oh yeah, that's fair because Jared and Mark still would have been there.
They lost in 2018 on that buzzer beater. So point being, they were pissed. You know, that's in their minds. I think that TCU loss from last year is going to be in their minds, and I think they're going to try to play really, really well on Saturday. Do you have any thoughts of the rest of the conference? Texas, Kansas. Anybody else that's kind of jumping in mind? I mean, is Texas really the number 14 in the nation to you?
I think they might be, honestly. They played Villanova tough. I think kind of the issue for me with Texas is that you're playing a freshman in Greg Brown, who the advanced stats like him right now, and the NBA draft folks love him because of how tall he is and he can hit threes. Mm-hmm. I'm a little nervous if he's your best guy going forward. And then Kai Jones is good, but he's only a sophomore. So they're a young team at some spots. I think they're good. I think they're a very good team. They could win a national title. That's how good they are. But I think they're clear tier below Baylor and Gonzaga at their best. And to me, it is good that Kansas and Texas are now other teams that might beat up on each other. And for me, Texas is a little too inconsistent at their best. Like, they didn't look very good at times in the Maui Invitational held in North Carolina when they played Indiana, and when they played North Carolina, who's not that good of a team. So, and Davidson almost beat them as well in that tournament. So I think their result against Kansas, there's a site called Shot Quality, and they post metrics based on where you take shots in a game and expected value from those shots. Like, kind of a similar deal if I went out to the bar post-COVID and I, only hit on women that were 10s and I got 10 numbers that night, we might say, okay, something's wrong. Go buy a lottery ticket, Kendall. That's never happening again. That kind of is, I think, how the KU game was for Texas, where they hit way too many threes compared to their talent level. But I do think that it was a good argument that they're right below Villanova for that number 4 spot. Where would you peg them, Andrew?
Yeah, I think I have to have them in the top 10. And the Big Ten is – I think there's some Big Ten teams that are probably better than Kansas, maybe Texas as well. The Big Ten's just beating up on everybody, this season already. But I think I probably have them in that top 5 range for now. I mean, they throttled Kansas, and we have to take that into consideration on the road. And they lost to Villanova by 4. I think that's their only loss. So really good team. They're definitely not the team that Baylor held to 44 and 45 points respectively last year. Maryland Eastern Shore scored more points against Baylor last year than Texas did in 2 games. So You know, yeah, it's going to be interesting, and it's so interesting how all the cancellations and delays have worked out. You know, at this point, you could say in the favor of Baylor, but all just like that Texas game, you know, would they have taken them lightly? That first Big 12 game in December, kind of a wacky time. Baylor had shut down the program for 10 days, and we're just coming back. Right around that time, and would they have taken them lightly? And a bunch of other things come into my mind to where we could have gotten throttled like Kansas did. And now I think that has to be in the players and coaches' mind of like, hey, we have to obviously take every game seriously, and like they did it. Instead they get to play Iowa State, win a tight one for what it's worth, and say, okay, like we got to ramp it up. Like we have unfinished business to take care of. So it's interesting. Yeah, I'll put Texas in the top 5. And you're bugging me because the more I think about it, yeah, like screw the Big 12 titles. Let's go win it all. No deal. So.
Yeah, and those are great points. I have 2 thoughts kind of about what you said, Andrew. First, is on the Texas one. I hadn't even thought about how that game's going to get rescheduled for the end of the season. So that's a possibility that literally could be a Big 12 championship game, at least for a share of the title for both teams. So I don't know how I'm finding the way down there for that one, but I'm going to find my way down there for that one. And then the second thing is, it's funny to me that the Big 12 and Big 10 have kind of reversed their normal spots, where a lot of years the Big 10 will have like one team, whether it's Michigan State or Michigan. It's like a clear top 3 team. And the Big 12 strength is, well, other than Kansas, we might not have any teams that are top 5 teams, but we have team 9, 11, 15, 17, 22, 27, 30, and nobody's that bad in the conference. Now the Big 12's in the reverse spot, I think, where it's Baylor's awesome and a top 2 team, Texas is a top 5 team, KU's a top 15 team. We got some middling teams, and then we got a couple teams that we don't really need to talk about. So all the years that the Big 12 spent saying, no, it's about if you have a bunch of top 30 teams, who cares if you have top 5 teams? And now the Big 10's like, who cares about top 5 teams? It's about those 30 teams. So we're doing the opposite of what we normally argue, but I respect that consistency is not essential in basketball.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Kansas Baylor game was the final game of the season. That was probably going to be the maybe for the Big 12, and now the delay and it might be with just how the teams are playing, it might be Baylor Texas for the Big 12 regular season title. Who knows? It's been an interesting year. Been a wild ride for sure. I hope you continue to get to as many games as possible. I hope to do the same. I'm not going to fly up to Iowa State or Kansas or anything like that, but I'll have to make some accommodations and drive up, obviously, to Austin and Waco as much as possible. Already have some on the schedule. Kendall, thank you so much for coming on. Any New Year's resolutions or goals for 2021 before we let you go here?
I did not set any because I figured I was going to violate them this year. So I didn't set any. That's probably a bad standard. So not good for me. I hope if you set any, Andrew, you will nail them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's cover as many games as possible. Keep putting out as much good Baylor basketball content as possible for 2021, and hopefully we have a fun season to look back on and a historic one at that. So, Kendall, thank you so much. Where can everybody find you? Just plug yourself real quick, whatever you want to plug.
Sure, Andrew, I appreciate that. I'm on Twitter at Kendall Kaut, and then Our Daily Bears. That's most of the times I appear there. So if there's anywhere else I appear, who cares? Those are the spots to find me.
Yeah, and go check out his newsletter as well. The election is long over, at least I guess for our sanity. We hope it's long over, but phenomenal job there as well. Kendall, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining the Minor Lounge.
Heck yeah, thanks, Andrew.